This is strong material, and some of the language you will hear. We want you to hear the sight and the sound of what happened this morning. But unfortunately, on this particular piece of tape, and one of the pieces of tape you're about to see, some of the language is strong. So if we can roll that videotape now or as soon as possible. One of the Trade Center buildings has been hit at a high floor, maybe above floor 90, by one aircraft. That would be American Flight 11. Now look at the plane come in the middle. Oh, what a picture.
Don't touch it. Oh my God!
That plane hit the second building at a much lower level. First plane hit very high up on the one tower, maybe floor 90 or above. Second plane at what? I don't know, maybe floor 71 and up. Yeah. You may want to run that videotape again. This we just got into our newsroom, this videotape. And not long after this, first one and then the other of these towers collapsed, and now we've had Building 7 of the World Trade Center, where Salomon Brothers Smith Barney had their headquarters. We're going to re-rack that videotape and show it to you again. As we do the re-racking, say that we don't have any confirmed figures on the number of people killed at the Pentagon or the number of people wounded there in Washington where a hijacked plane hit. We have no idea of the New York fatalities. Here again is this photograph. The building on the left is about to be hit by the hijacked incoming plane.
Holy fuck! Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ! Don't touch it. Oh my God!
A ball of flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center towers.
Oh my God!
Untold death and destruction. As after being hit by the second plane, the second tower eventually collapsed after the, both of these twin towers collapsed. Now Building 7 in the World Trade Center, after being evacuated, we're told, collapsed. In the debris below, people still trapped. This is new videotape that had not been seen before. Dateline Washington, the Pentagon now says, and we've checked and double-checked this, 100 people believed killed or injured. There's no differentiation. We still don't know how many killed, how many injured at the Pentagon, but the Defense Department says its best available information is 100 people believed killed or injured at the Pentagon. And while the Pentagon symbolically was one of the two targets today, that the death, the wounding, and the damage at the Pentagon, nothing to compare with what's happened with the World Trade Center complex. Now we're going to re-cue that sequence of videotape. This includes new videotape material obtained by CBS News over the last hour and a half. We have shown some of it. Now, this is the latest new video we have. You see the plane coming in high speed, aiming for the mid-level, and hits it. That was the second flight, United Flight 175, and this is a reverse side of the building. See, the plane actually pierced the building.
There were several angles.
Virtually came out the other side. Yet another view, the plane hitting.
It's almost like the building swallowed the plane.
Yeah.
Yes. And here you see this aircraft below. Did you see that?
Mm.
You had to be looking closely on the right-hand side to see it hitting there. And indeed, Russ Mitchell said it's almost as if the building swallowed the plane and then belched back up. Well, nobody's ever seen photographs like that because nothing like this has ever happened before. We go to David Martin at the Pentagon.
This comes to us from PAX TV. I wonder, guys, if we can re-cue that in a moment and show that again. You see the fire coming out of the first building there, the plane on the lower left side of your screen. And it looks to me, and I'll confess I don't have the greatest monitor here, that you could almost see the nose of that plane coming through the other side of the building. That may have been an illusion as we looked at it here, but that's how it looked to us. As the flames, these are fully loaded planes, fully loaded with jet fuel. They were headed from the East Coast to the West Coast, so they had an enormous amount of jet fuel. Jeffrey Beatty, a security consultant, said to us a little bit ago, this was low-tech, high-concept. The plane was the bomb, and you just saw the bomb go off. That was around 10 o'clock this morning.
There goes the building. There's a picture of the building collapsing just moments ago. We finally got the tape in. That is Trade Center building number 7. It was involved, I guess you would call it collateral damage here, from the original collapse and fires of the 2 Trade Center towers. And moments ago, our fire department here in New York lost it, and it collapsed. Richard, I'm just trying to get a couple of... How long did it take you to walk down 32 flights? We're trying to judge how long it would have taken somebody on the 80th floor of the tower to get out of the building before it collapsed.
No, a lot of people passed me because I'm a big guy, so I wanted to walk slowly going down 32 flights. It took me about 20 minutes because they already had the doors locked down on where I had to get out.
Richard, also, if I can jump in, just so people understand who was in the World Trade Center, there are some small offices that nobody might recognize, but then again, there are also companies that a lot of people recognize. I mean, from everywhere from Avis car rental to Lehman Brothers, the investment house, to Delta Airlines. Who else?
Well, Morgan Stanley has quite a few floors, like 10%.
So this morning, and then the second tower, which collapsed shortly thereafter, at least where building number 7 is concerned, a building that, among other things, housed the emergency response team of the city of New York.
Plane came right in over that green area, right along Route 395, just south of Washington. Very major commuter artery there. There you see the Potomac River in the background, and to the right, the runways of National Airport. And you can understand, Shep, how it would have been possible for air controllers and indeed even defense officials in Washington watching a plane approach along a path toward that Pentagon to believe that it was really just heading for National Airport, and at the last minute veered off course. So you get a sense of how vulnerable in terms of its geographic location the Pentagon is to the kind of attack that was made today by a large aircraft. And then you see some of the rescue workers working there on the ground. These pictures again from our station WTTG Fox 5 here in Washington. There's the helipad, and there you see the area of impact and that enormous cavity in the wall where several stories of that building were simply gutted, knocked down, wiped out. Shep?
And we are left to wonder at this hour, Britt, whether those responsible for this attack knew what David Schuster has been reporting throughout the day, that in fact much of this area of the Pentagon had just been remodeled and refurbished, and much of it was empty, largely unoccupied at the time of this attack. The latest numbers on casualties that we've gotten, and they are in flux, and I hesitate to even mention them as due to the fact that they will certainly be changing, but largely unoccupied. By some stroke of luck, this plane went into the one section of the Pentagon where it could do the least amount of human damage. That is not the case on the southern tip of Manhattan. Our understanding is that on a given day, 50,000 people should have been inside that business, inside those 2 buildings there working. That's not to mention building number 7, which later collapsed this afternoon. 50,000 people, plus the tourists who flocked to this building to go to the observation tower, and I dare say a number of people in our viewing audience have been to the top and have taken photos from that place and have seen the expansive view with Lady Liberty just below. All of that now down in rubble. Certainly one bit of good news is that the large tourist influx which we have prior to Labor Day, which would have left long lines at that building waiting on the observation deck, all of those tourists for the most part are gone. School has started back in most parts of the country, and where on a Tuesday morning 1 week ago, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, you would have had literally thousands of people, tourists from across the country waiting to get to that observation deck. We can hope and pray that that is not the case today. As you stand on the corner on our building in Midtown Manhattan and look south, the smoke is still rising in an enormous new dust cloud which came with the falling of building number 7, that 42-story structure just around the corner from there. That enormous tower of smoke is still in the air, much of it ash, with an east wind taking it away from Manhattan and off to the sides, as rescue workers will no doubt toil throughout the evening, the number of people brought to hospitals seems incredibly low, in the low hundreds, given our knowledge that literally tens of thousands of people were inside. Now, one good part of all of this is the first two crashes. The crash of the first jet was followed by the second some 10 minutes later. That allows a number of people to get out. And this morning on the way as I rushed into work was hearing firsthand accounts. One from a lady who was in the second tower, which had not yet been hit by a plane. She was on the 92nd story and was able to walk down all 92nd floors. And she was describing a sort of ordered chaos within the stairwells of this 110-story structure, as literally thousands of people were able to make it out of that second structure long before that jet plowed into the building. We have so many different camera angles of this, and we have slowed them down and looked at them very closely. And it would appear that as the jet goes into the second tower, the West Tower down at the World Trade Center, that enormous 767's nose goes into, not from this angle, but you can see on another angle, coming in one side and the nose literally plucking out the other. Is it possible that that's an optical illusion? Certainly. But imagine the speed at which it was flying, this airborne bomb loaded with fuel, ready to travel across country, and instead exploding in the middle of that building. Now, there were thousands of people below the area where the planes crashed into the building. You can see the first one is quite high, the second one somewhat lower, and people below that, presumably, and we are told by good authority from downtown that many thousands of people were able to get out unharmed before the two structures collapsed. What seems clear now is that an untold number of rescue personnel, New York's finest and New York's bravest, both at the foot of that building, working feverishly to get inside to help those who were trying to get out, when World Trade Center, all 110 stories, crumbled down on top of them. The cleanup and rescue effort is just beginning, and the ramifications of all this being seen now across the seas in Afghanistan, where it would appear at least the night skies have lit up and something has happened. Explosions can be heard north of Kabul, Afghanistan, in the vicinity of the airport. Large plumes of smoke can be seen in the direction of the airport. An Associated Press reporter is coming to the city, and a story is upcoming. So the latest we know is, and thanks to our colleagues at CNN for those pictures, and that familiar face who showed up somehow on our air, thanks to them for those pictures, and word now that it would appear at least that America may have struck back, Britt.
This very intensely.
ABC reporters across the city are beginning to hear the word terrorism.
It seems obvious unofficially to people here that it was a terrorist attack, but they obviously can't reach any firm conclusions at this point. So the Pentagon is engaged, and I'm sure law enforcement is, but they say they had no warnings.
Report piles on report.
Okay, there's been an explosion of some kind that shook the grounds of the Capitol. We all heard it. Everybody ran for cover. We don't know where it was. We don't see the smoke yet. Everybody's saying, get back. We're running, we're running, we're running, we're running. They're screaming at us to get back.
On television, it looked like it was happening all over. 10:28 a.m., New York City, and in the shadow of the one remaining tower, a snatch of conversation between a reporter and a rescuer.
Why are they pulling us out of here?
Because the tower is leaning.
The north tower is leaning.
Broadway.
Right, Mark, quick. Oh my God, there it goes!
I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
Commentator on CNN and the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson. She called her husband twice during the hijacking to tell him the plane had been hijacked. And they lost contact once, and she called back. After the first call, Olson called the command center at the Justice Department to inform them of this hijacking, and they said they knew nothing about it but would track it down. Barbara Olson told Ted the following story, that all the passengers were herded to the back of the plane, including the flight personnel, including the pilot. And the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. You would think if there were a machine gun or any other kind of gun that she would have mentioned that. But the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. I asked Ted if she made any reference to nationality of the hijackers or any suspicions about the motive, and he said she made no reference to that at all. They didn't have a whole lot of time to talk. She said to Ted, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Somewhat typical of Barbara, a take charge kind of person. But there was nothing they could do, and they're all trapped in the back of the plane.
Did she, or was she able to tell Mr. Olson how many hijackers were on board the plane? Or at least how many she may have seen?
I asked Ted that. No, but she referred to them as more than one. More than one. Incidentally, she wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. She was booked on a flight yesterday, but today is Ted's birthday, so she wanted to be here this morning to have breakfast with him before she left.
And
sad story.
It's a horrible story, and one can only assume that it is one of many horrible stories that we will hear in the hours ahead. It says something about the world we live in, that people, while this was going on, were able to make cell phone calls. We heard earlier today of another call that was made from a plane, that there was some awareness on the ground, perhaps not formal awareness, but some awareness of what was going on, at least on some of those, excuse me, on some of those planes. Mr. Olson must be devastated.
La vida. Estoy eligiendo morir estrellándome contra un piso que está a cientos de pies de distancia porque no quiero morir quemado.
Es verdad, tenían una sola opción, la muerte.
Por un instante...
Information will come out as the air traffic control tapes and hopefully the cockpit voice recordings come out. But just take a look at this. This is actual archival information from the radar tracks from the FAA ground centers. And these are the two planes which ultimately ended up at the World Trade Centers, the two towers. Both of them left Boston within 15 minutes of each other. Both were headed to Los Angeles, perhaps no coincidence, heavily laden with fuel. Both of them made extreme and noticeable deviations and were heading in the wrong direction for 30, perhaps 40 minutes, thus clearly giving air traffic controllers quite a bit of attention. There must have been some communication back and forth. It's unclear now.
This is certainly something the air traffic control folks would have seen. They would have seen these things
clearly.
coming up close.
And the fact that two planes were doing this must have seemed odd. We don't know what the conversations were, but suffice to say that would be odd. Now take a look at this flight. This is United 93. This took off from Dulles Airport, was headed for San Francisco. Once again, a coast-to-coast flight, heavily laden with fuel, flew on out from Newark to about Cleveland, then took its dogleg, was headed pretty much to the D.C. area, and then disappeared off the radar screens right here outside of the Pittsburgh area, a place called Shanksville. We don't know what happened there. What's kind of odd about this one, Joey, is that at some point after flying past Pittsburgh, the pilot apparently radioed and changed his destination to DCA, which is Ronald Reagan National Airport. Unclear what that means. Now let me just kind of put this all onto one graphic, if you will. If we can put up that graphic, and I'll use the telestrator to show you exactly what's going on. All right, here are the important cities. First of all, let's take a look at 8 a.m. and see what happens at 8 a.m. And that was the first departure. Okay, this is the flight, American Airlines Flight 11. Was headed out this way to Los Angeles, 81 passengers, 11 crew member. Now, 8:15, United Flight 175 heads out a little different route across, also headed for Los Angeles. That was at 8:15. 8:21 a.m., Dulles Airport is your location, and that is American Airlines Flight 77, a 757, 58 passengers and crew. It headed off onto Los Angeles. We don't have a radar track on this, so I'm doing a little bit of speculation there. Finally, United Airlines Flight 93 at 8:43 as it departs Newark Airport and begins its trip all the way over to Cleveland. Now, let's get the impact times here. 8:45, the flight, American Airlines Flight 11, impacts in New York at the World Trade Center. 9:03, The United Flight 175 impacts at the World Trade Center. 9:45 a.m., and of course all these times are Eastern times. The flight, American Airlines flight that was headed from Dulles to Dulles to Los Angeles, hits at the, excuse me, I was drawing, I should have been drawing that to New York. I was drawing it to Washington. Hits at the Pentagon, my apologies on that. And then finally, United Air Flight 93 ends up in outside of Pittsburgh. That made a bit of a hash there, but that gives you a sense of how well coordinated this was and how sophisticated an operation this was. A couple of points to remember. The fact that if you can fly a 757, you can fly a 767, identical cockpits, so if you were training somebody to fly that aircraft, they're more or less interchangeable. But the point that is worth mentioning here is you had 4 large airliners on transcontinental flights with extreme deviations. The air traffic control system clearly was upset by this. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about the radio transmissions and whether at some point the big picture was ever analyzed. It's done by individual centers. Maybe the big picture wasn't analyzed.
Miles O'Brien, our correspondent, thanks very much for your insight into all this. Now,
this happened, and where Mayor Giuliani speaks just a few minutes ago, they know of 2,100 people injured, and you see the pictures that the young man brought us from the absolute bottom, ground zero location, where the tower not only crashed on itself, but then crashed down into the ground. There wasn't a sound there except the sound of flames licking up from underground, and there was no sign of any person. And we know, because we've said it many times, that the fire department and the police department were going inwards, not outwards, when all of this happened. It's just absolutely impossible to get a grasp on. I'm very interested in the gentleman we spoke to a little while ago from the law firm, I've probably forgotten his last name. Say it out loud. Thank you, Tom Humphreys. Tom Humphreys, who said that it was his impression, at least in his building, in the North Tower, that a lot of people got out of that or had not arrived at work because it was, as he said, by New York standards, just a little earlier than people were accustomed. But when this young man, Mr. Sabi, brought us his video that he'd taken, just got on his motorbike up and then walked in to this scene on the ground, it is to realize that everybody's being kept, as Bill Blakemore subsequently confirmed for us, being kept at a distance from this at the side, and that's what's left on the left of the facade of the North Tower. ABC's Bob Jameson is downtown now, and Bob, we're looking at the pictures that have been brought to us by this young producer of a magazine. Can you just talk in general terms as you like?
Of carrying about 250 passengers apiece. There were 4 planes involved, and we thought initially that the death count just from the airline planes alone could be upwards of 800 or so. It turns out that according to United Airlines and American Airlines, some 266 people, that's passengers, flight attendants, and crew, have been killed in all of these crashes. And as of yet, there is no explanation from the FAA as to how these security breaches took place.
4 hours since the planes attacked. 78 police officers still feared dead. One insurance company estimating that perhaps more than 1,000 of their employees have yet to be accounted for. New York City still just beginning now to grapple with exactly what happened. Of course, New Yorkers have been advised not to come to work. Thus, all of the surrounding streets of Manhattan at this hour, which would normally be incredibly humming and busy, are deserted. And people are staying in and presumably watching television. Bodies have been taken to various triage facilities and hospitals along New York's west side. Blood centers have been established, things like that. Paula.
Richard, I have to admit to you, your audio was distorted at the top of your report. Would you like to reprise the first 30 seconds or so of your report, because we didn't capture that?
Well, I was holding up the 2 of the leading tabloid newspapers from New York, where you presumably saw It's War, and says the New York Daily News, an active war, World Trade Center destroyed, many dead, according to the New York Post. And I was relating how that was, for me, eerily familiar. It was just like what happened 11 years ago, nearly 11 years ago, on the roof in downtown Tel Aviv after Iraq struck near the Israeli Defense Ministry, and war had erupted a day earlier in the Persian.
at the top of the World Financial Center. We don't know what it is, don't know what may have caused it. Obviously, it's still a very, very dangerous situation in that area. There are a number of fires that continue to burn. Ashley Banfield had been talking to some of the folks who have been down there at Ground Zero just a little while earlier. She said there's at least one other fairly large building that they were extremely concerned about its structural integrity. Fires continue to rage in the debris, and now you see that there is something burning at the top of the World Financial Center, adjacent to where the World Trade Towers.
Such incidents, he will have failed in his primary job, really, as commander-in-chief.
Dan, of course, the other side would say he didn't ask to be handed this morning. He is doing the very best he can. He has all the forces at his disposal, certainly in his government, doing the best they can. He's going to proceed slowly, and when we know who the enemy is, we will hit back at the enemy. I guess it's a fine line of perception. American people are forming opinions right now. In the great American tradition, though, Dan, Jimmy Carter, for one, issued a statement saying that this is the time. And one of the great things about this country is people do rally around the president and give him a lot of room during times of crisis.
Oh, I think that this is a situation made for leadership, made for a leader like President Bush. He seems to be, responding well to what has got to be a real shock situation and a rapidly changing situation. So, I mean, so far, we're seeing the kind of proper behavior out of not just the president, but out of his entire administration, which should be reassuring.
And friends of the administration have said during the day, this is why the president chose the cabinet he did. This is why the president ran with Dick Cheney. When times turn tough, that is where experience comes into play.
Remember, we also had Secretary Rumsfeld in the Pentagon, staying in the Pentagon Situation Room with his staff, most of whom are experienced people, the same way, operating like it was the British government during the London Blitz. They went on with business.
Now, Dan, about tonight, the next day, the day after, you have a shaken country on your hands. We've never seen a nationwide ground hold on all air travel before. How do we go about deciding as a nation how much freedom we are willing to give up and how many restrictions we are willing to take on, say, the next time most Americans fly on their way to Thanksgiving or the Christmas holidays?
Well, one of the things, of course, we'd like to know is what failed in the security system. Was it somebody sneaking aboard, or people sneaking aboard these planes? Was it, in fact, new kinds of weapons that we're not aware of, plastic guns or whatever, before we decide what kind of restrictions? But clearly, we could do the same kind of things that other countries do. The Israelis do. India does. Everybody's bag gets not only x-rayed, but everybody gets searched and patted down. It makes for a slow process, but, that may be what we have to do, at least temporarily.
But then
capability of going back in sort of a forensic fashion and figuring out who did what.
We may well have. Again, it's going to depend to a great degree on how closed-mouthed these people were. If they were as professional as they seem to be, it may well be that there is no evidence. But on the other hand, there is also no question that you can go back and not quickly necessarily, but you can very often establish precisely the kind of information you're looking for when you know what's already happened, but you can't do it beforehand.
Mr. Eagleburger, hold on just a second. Richard Shelby, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is speaking now in Washington. Let's listen in.
Families that were lost today, and we should be, but we've got to realize that this is a wake-up call for America. A lot of us have been talking about terrorism, counterterrorism, how to deal with it. We live in an open society, and we're not going to live in a bunker, and we shouldn't. And I'll see what goes on in this meeting in here, but I think the bottom line is we were basically caught flat-footed, and we've lost a lot of people, and that's sad.
Who's responsible, Senator?
Well, I'm not here to blame anybody. I'm just here to say that we've got to do better.
People out of the building, and so many lives were saved, but unquestionably many were lost. You look at this debris, mind you, heavy steel beams heavy concrete, marble, as well as steel and iron crashing down from 110 stories up in a ball of fire and explosion. It will be a long time, many, many hours, if not indeed days, before any reasonable assessment of how many people were actually killed and wounded here in New York.
Driving up Massachusetts Avenue, which is one of the main thoroughfares here in the nation's capital, goes all the way from the Capitol out to Northwest Washington, beyond the Naval Observatory where the Vice President lives, and beyond on out into the Maryland suburbs. There was observed a convoy of military vehicles, Humvees, military vehicles, driving up slowly, patrolling, appearing to patrol the area, going out away from the Capitol toward northwest, toward Maryland. Now, perhaps this is just a patrolling effort, but the sight of it has to be something to cause comment, because normally at this hour in Washington you would see an enormous amount of just rush hour traffic. But today is not like any other day.
A gun into the air with joy at news of the attacks in the United States at the Palestinian refugee camp of Shatila in Beirut. Palestinians have repeatedly accused the United States of failing to stop Israel's attacks against Palestinian nationals. Photos like this, by the way, are in almost every newspaper this morning. As we go to Orange, New Jersey next, what was your experience like yesterday?
Well, I was one of the last people
on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan at this point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent, Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul, the seat of Afghanistan's power, the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at, but you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you hear us?
We're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city, and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment.